Rose was in her kitchen, focused on preparing lunch, when an unexpected, piercing pain gripped her stomach. She gasped, clutching the countertop as the pain intensified, a sensation sharper and more intense than any she'd ever felt. Her grip faltered, and the pan she was holding crashed to the floor, scattering its contents. The sound startled her husband, Anthony, who rushed in, his eyes wide with worry. "Rose, what happened? Are you okay?" he asked, moving toward her, his face full of concern. Forcing a weak smile, Rose waved him off. "It's nothing, just a cramp." The pain's already fading, but even as she spoke, a lingering tightness reminded her that this wasn't just a passing discomfort. Anthony, however, wasn't convinced. "I've noticed your belly looks a little swollen lately. Maybe it's time to see a doctor." Rose rolled her eyes, trying to brush off his concern. "Oh, come on, it's just some bloating. I probably overindulged a bit this past week. A little exercise, some self-control, and I'll be back to normal." Anthony didn't press further, but worry lingered in his gaze. "You know, Rose," he continued after a moment, "it's unusual for you to gain weight so suddenly." Rose let out a laugh, brushing away the absurdity of his remark. Yet as the days passed, her body seemed to defy her resolve. Her belly swelled more each day, and the pain continued, sometimes sharp, other times a dull ache. But it was always there. Determined to avoid doctors at any cost, she told herself it was just temporary. After all, she was only 50, and as a mother of 3, she had always been healthy. Hospitals, in her view, were for emergencies, and this would pass, surely. But the nights grew restless. She would lie awake, tossing and turning as the pressure inside her stomach became unbearable. Then, one morning, after barely any sleep, she stumbled to the bathroom, hoping a splash of water would help. In the mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself, a swollen belly, almost as if she were 7 months along in pregnancy. She shook her head in disbelief. "It's just bloat," she muttered under her breath. "It's impossible." Later that day, Anthony again raised his concerns, his gaze unwavering. "Rose, please. This is serious. I think we should go to the hospital." She hesitated, but quickly brushed it off. "Not today," she insisted. "The kids are coming over, and I want to spend time with them. I'll have some tea that'll do the trick." But by the end of the day, the pain had returned with renewed vengeance. It was sharper, stronger. She could barely stand and finally relented. "All right," she said through gritted teeth. "If this doesn't go away in the next few days, I'll see a doctor." 2 days passed, and Anthony's worry grew as he noticed her belly swelling even more, taking on a disturbingly unnatural shape. One morning, as she clutched her stomach in silent agony, he insisted, "We're going to the hospital, Rose. Today. No more excuses." Despite her protests, Anthony guided her to the car, ignoring her objections as they made their way to the hospital. Once there, the nurses noticed her strange, bloated stomach and quickly brought a stretcher. Rose, her face pale and her breathing labored, let herself be laid down, realizing that her pain had escalated to a point where even she couldn't deny the need for help. Dr. Emily, the obstetrician on duty, approached with a reassuring smile. "Let's take a look," she said kindly, gently examining Rose's abdomen. After a few moments, her expression grew puzzled. "How many weeks along?" Emily asked, studying the pronounced curve of Rose's belly. "Through labored breaths," Rose replied. "I'm not pregnant." She could barely manage the words. Her head spun with the pain. Emily's brow furrowed. "You're sure? This looks quite similar to a late-term pregnancy. We should run an ultrasound." Rose nodded, too exhausted to argue, and was soon wheeled into the examination room. Dr. Emily prepared the ultrasound equipment, applying the cool gel to Rose's belly. As she pressed the probe to Rose's skin, she froze, a look of horror flickering across her face. She withdrew her hand slowly, still processing what she had felt beneath her fingertips. With a hint of disbelief, she glanced up, murmuring, "I'll need a second opinion on this. Nurse, please call Dr. Leonard." Dr. Leonard, a senior gastroenterologist, arrived minutes later. He listened intently as Emily explained the case, his face growing serious. When he placed his hand on Rose's belly, his fingers recoiled at the movement beneath her skin. He straightened, looking at Emily with an expression of pure shock. "Are you seeing this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily nodded grimly. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. We need to proceed cautiously. Let's prepare her for a deeper examination." As Dr. Leonard prepared the equipment, he turned to Rose and Anthony. "We're going to do an endoscopy. We believe there's something unusual in your abdomen." Rose's eyes widened, but she managed to nod. Anthony grasped her hand tightly, offering a reassuring squeeze. "We're in good hands," he whispered, though his own heart pounded with fear. Soon the camera was inserted, and the monitor displayed the inside of Rose's stomach. Leonard and Emily stared, frozen in horror. There, amidst the tissue, was a massive, writhing creature, a tapeworm, its body pulsating as it moved. "My God," Emily whispered, unable to tear her gaze from the screen. She turned to Anthony and Rose, her voice laced with urgency. "There's a parasitic creature in your abdomen. We need to operate immediately." Anthony's face turned pale, and Rose felt her heartbeat thud in her ears. But even through her fear, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, just get it out of me." The surgical team prepared quickly, understanding the urgency. Rose was moved into an operating room, and the anesthesiologist administered a mild sedative to calm her nerves. Dr. Leonard and Dr. Emily explained the procedure in a soothing tone, assuring her that the operation would be straightforward and effective. As the anesthesia took effect, Rose's thoughts began to blur, and she felt her body relax. But as they started, something strange happened. Her stomach began to convulse, and Rose, still partially conscious, could feel a strange, intense movement beneath her skin. Her eyes widened in alarm, and she clutched Dr. Emily's arm weakly. "It's moving," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily leaned in, her face a mask of concern. "Rose, try to stay calm. We're here to help you." But before they could begin the incision, Rose suddenly jerked upright, clutching her stomach and letting out a scream that echoed through the operating room. The doctors and nurses froze in shock. Rose struggled against the staff, holding her down, her voice shaking with fear. "I can't. I need to. Go to the bathroom." Dr. Leonard and Emily exchanged a puzzled look but decided to follow her wishes. "Help her to the restroom," Leonard instructed a nurse. "We'll resume once she's more comfortable." Two nurses guided Rose to the bathroom adjacent to the operating room. She barely made it before slamming the door shut. Minutes ticked by, and a strange silence filled the air. Then the door creaked open, and Rose stepped out, looking weak but strangely relieved. "It's out," she said softly, pointing behind her with a shaky finger. Her face bore an odd expression, one of relief mixed with disbelief. Dr. Emily hurried inside to check, and there, in the toilet bowl, lay the creature, a massive, pale, writhing tapeworm, still moving. The sight was grotesque, and Emily's face contorted in horror and fascination. She called for Dr. Leonard, who entered and stared in shock. "This can't be real," he muttered, shaking his head. Yet there it was, alive and pulsating in the water. They carefully retrieved the parasite, placing it in a specimen container to prevent it from escaping. Meanwhile, Rose, her color returning, turned to Anthony, who had come in just as the creature was removed. He looked at her with astonishment. "You're okay," he whispered, his voice filled with a mix of relief and awe. Rose gave him a small, shaky smile. "I told you my tea would work," she said, attempting to lighten the tension with humor. It was a laxative blend. Anthony couldn't help but chuckle, and the doctors, still in disbelief, exchanged amused glances. The rest of the medical team, hearing about the bizarre case, gathered around as Dr. Leonard and Dr. Emily examined the parasite more closely. Back in the examination room, Dr. Emily spoke gently to Rose. "We'll run a few more tests just to ensure everything is okay, but it looks like you've expelled the parasite." Relieved, Rose agreed to the additional examinations, hoping to put the ordeal behind her. After hours of testing, the results were clear. There was no damage to her internal organs, and her stomach was free from any remaining parasites. She was healthy, albeit shaken. That night, the doctors met to discuss the case. The tapeworm was identified as a rare, mutated specimen, something they hadn't seen in their careers. They theorized that Rose might have consumed contaminated food, and for reasons unknown, the parasite had grown to a monstrous size within her. When the news of Rose's case reached the local media, it sparked a flurry of curiosity. But Rose, still recovering from her ordeal, declined interviews, preferring to keep the details private. All she wanted was to return to a life free from strange symptoms and endless medical tests. Days later, as she settled back into her routine, she found herself reflecting on how close she'd come to ignoring something serious. In the quiet of her living room, she reached for Anthony's hand, giving it a grateful squeeze. "Maybe next time. I'll listen to you sooner," she said with a smile, though the memory of the tapeworm still haunted her. Anthony laughed, pulling her close. "And maybe I'll stock up on that tea just in case." They shared a chuckle, and for the first time in days, Rose felt at ease, knowing the ordeal was over, and she was back in the safety and comfort of her home. A few weeks later, Rose returned to the hospital for a follow-up, feeling much stronger. Dr. Leonard and Dr. Emily greeted her with smiles, eager to check on her recovery. The two doctors had since become minor celebrities among their colleagues, known for handling the tapeworm case with expertise and composure. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Emily assured her after a brief examination. "You're in great health, and there's no sign of any remaining issues. It's a relief to see you back to normal, Rose." Relieved, Rose thanked them both, genuinely grateful. Before leaving, she asked a question that had been bothering her since the incident. Dr. Leonard, Dr. Emily, how could something like this happen? I mean, a tapeworm growing that large, it's horrifying. Is there a chance it could happen again? Leonard shared a thoughtful glance with Emily before replying. Cases like this are incredibly rare, Rose. Tapeworms don't typically reach this size or survive this long undetected. We suspect a mutation of some kind, likely due to contaminated food. You were very unlucky, but at the same time, very lucky that it didn't do any lasting damage. Emily nodded in agreement. We can't say for certain, but it's safe to assume this was a one-time occurrence. Just be mindful of what you eat, and if anything feels off, don't hesitate to get checked out.